I want you to visualize a scene that's probably playing out in your own neighborhood right now.
Mm-hmm.
Picture yourself standing outside on a quiet suburban street late at night. The physical environment is it's the absolute picture of modern stability.
Right, very peaceful.
Exactly. You have the soft, amber hum of the streetlights, the manicured lawns, the quiet idling of a transformer somewhere in the distance. The world feels entirely at rest.
But then you look closer.
Yeah, you look at the houses lining that street and you see the glowing windows. And behind almost every single one of those windows, people are sitting in the dark, bathed in the blue light of flickering screens.
Just absorbing all of it.
And the information pouring out of those screens is a relentless, high-velocity torrent of global instability. We're talking cascading localized conflicts, macroeconomic volatility threatening global markets, predictive climate models forecasting, unprecedented disruption. Right. The rapid deployment of AI systems fundamentally altering human labor. The physical world around them is completely, almost eerily still. But their cognitive world is practically on fire.
That juxtaposition is really the defining characteristic of the modern condition, isn't it?
It really is.
You have this profound dissonance between the immediate physical reality, like sitting on a comfortable couch in a climate-controlled room, completely safe from kinetic danger.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the hyper-accelerated abstract digital reality we are constantly internalizing. We are processing existential civilization-level threats on a global scale while physically doing nothing more strenuous than, swiping a piece of glass.
Swiping a piece of glass, exactly. And that friction, that tension between the quiet streets and the screaming screens is the exact focal point of our deep dive today.
And we have some incredible material to work with.
We do. We have an incredibly dense, genuinely haunting collection of source material to unpack. We are pulling entirely from a fascinating text titled Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf.
It's quite a read.
For those of you who haven't encountered it yet, this isn't a collection of standard news briefs or academic white papers.
No, not at all.
Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf is a deeply observant, philosophical, and sociological breakdown of humanity's current psychological state.
Yeah, the author, who writes under this persona of the lone wolf, operates as a kind of silent observer navigating this landscape.
Is documenting things.
Right, documenting how ordinary people are reacting to these massive invisible forces that are currently rewiring our civilization. The text captures this pervasive, unspoken feeling that we are standing at the absolute precipice of a new era.
But before we go any further, I think it's critical we establish the framework for how we're approaching this material.
Absolutely. We need to set the boundaries here.
Because the Echoes from the Edge texts delve heavily into anxieties permeating the public consciousness right now. We're going to be discussing public fears surrounding classified technological research, government secrecy, institutional opacity.
Which can be a minefield.
Right. So our mission here today is to conduct an entirely impartial analysis of why these specific anxieties have taken root in the collective psyche.
We're looking at this purely through a sociological lens.
Exactly. We're not here to validate the existence of hidden technologies, nor are we here to debunk them.
That's not the goal of the text either.
No. The text itself doesn't ask the reader to litigate the factual reality of every internet rumor. It asks us to examine the psychological reality of living in a society that feels entirely disconnected from the mechanisms of its own future.
Right, the feeling of losing control.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's jump straight into the underlying mechanics of that disconnect. The first major theme the Lone Wolf tackles is this extreme evolutionary mismatch we're currently experiencing.
The visible versus the invisible.
Exactly. We are dealing with a species that possesses unprecedented godlike technological power, yet the average individual understands almost nothing about the systems dictating their daily survival.
The text calls it the invisible architecture.
Yes, the invisible architecture. To understand the weight of that, we really have to look at how the human nervous system processes threat vectors.
Right, because evolution optimized human neurology to respond to localized kinetic threats.
Physical things.
Physical things. A localized threat has physical dimensions, a trajectory, an immediate visual signature.
Like a storm rolling in.
Or an enemy charging across a battlefield. The autonomic nervous system is incredibly efficient at processing those inputs. The amygdala registers the visual data, triggers the sympathetic nervous system, and floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol.
Getting you ready to fight or run.
Precisely, to prepare for a physical response. You identify the physical vector, you react to it, and the stress cycle completes itself.
But the lone wolf argues that the primary forces shaping human civilization today are entirely non-kinetic and borderless.
The architecture of modern power is invisible.
We're talking about complex algorithmic structures, high-frequency trading networks, classified research silos, predictive behavioral
Blue
models.
lights, climate models.
Right. These are the systems that actually dictate the trajectory of our lives, but they lack any physical manifestation. You can't visually track a fluctuating global supply chain.
No, you can't.
You can't brace for impact against a macroeconomic shift.
And that is exactly where the psychological friction originates. We are trying to interpret threat signals from systems that operate at a speed and scale that the human brain simply cannot map.
It's just too vast.
Too vast and too fast. Let's look at the financial markets as a prime example from the text. The public perception of finance is still largely rooted in human-to-human interaction, like the trading floor.
Guys shouting and waving paper.
Exactly, the old movies. But the reality is that the vast majority of global liquidity is controlled by high-frequency trading algorithms.
Code.
Just code. These systems are executing millions of trades in fractions of a second, exploiting micro-arbitrages across global exchanges. They are capable of moving trillions of dollars and shifting the valuation of entire national economies before a human analyst can even read the data output.
So mechanically speaking, how does the human nervous system react when it encounters a threat of that magnitude?
It reacts exactly the same way it always has.
But with nowhere to direct it? If you get a push notification that an algorithmic flash crash just wiped out 20% of a specific market index, your sympathetic nervous system still fires.
The cortisol is still released.
But there's no localized kinetic vector to respond to. You can't fight a server farm in another hemisphere.
And you certainly can't outrun an automated margin call.
Right, so the stress cycle cannot complete itself.
The biological imperative to act is thwarted by the extreme abstraction of the threat. The anxiety simply pools in the body.
It just sits there.
It manifests as a pervasive, paralyzing existential dread. You are trapped in a state of hypervigilance, waiting for a blow that you will never actually see coming.
And the lone wolf notes that this dynamic strips away our fundamental sense of agency. We're living in a highly advanced civilization, yet as individuals, we are functionally powerless against the infrastructure of that civilization.
And it really hits home when you think about how this affects you, the listener, in your day-to-day life.
Oh, absolutely. Let's push on that concept of powerlessness for a second, because the text argues that this invisible architecture extends far beyond macroeconomics.
It's in our daily routines.
For those of you listening, consider the automated processes that dictate your professional and personal logistics right now.
The workplace is a great example.
Right, the way your digital communications are routed, the predictive algorithms determining your creditworthiness, the machine learning models parsing your resume before a human ever even sees it.
If a human ever sees it.
Exactly. The parameters of your life are being defined by strings of code written by engineers you will never meet, optimizing for metrics you are never allowed to see.
And that loss of systemic visibility, that feeling of being locked out of the control room, is exactly what leads to the second major theme in the echoes from the edge texts.
Which is the extreme fragility of institutional trust and the shadows of the classified age.
Because it is one thing to feel anxious about a system that is complex and opaque, like an algorithmic market.
Sure, that's just the nature of modern tech.
But it is a vastly different psychological experience to suspect that the systems governing reality are being intentionally obscured from the public.
And this is where we get into some really fascinating territory. The lone wolf observes a highly corrosive question currently circulating in the cultural undercurrent.
And that question is, what if the technological baseline shaping the world is decades ahead of what the public is allowed to understand?
Yeah, let's challenge that assumption for a second. Hasn't there always been a gap between state-level capabilities and public knowledge? I mean, during the Cold War, the public was well aware that governments were developing classified nuclear capabilities.
Right. The Manhattan Project wasn't public until it was over.
Exactly. So what makes the lone wolf's observation of today's secrecy fundamentally different from the classified anxieties of, say, the 1960s?
That is a crucial distinction to make. The difference lies in the integration and the intimacy of the technology. And yes, in the mid-20th century, classified technology was largely compartmentalized to military hardware. Nuclear silos, early radar installations, advanced aerospace platforms.
They're physical things.
Right. The text points to historical examples like the development of stealth aircraft. The F-117 Nighthawk, for instance, was flying operational missions for years before the public or the broader scientific community even knew that radar-evading aviation geometry was possible.
And they kept it completely hidden.
And that established a historical precedent. It serves as a reminder that the cutting edge of science often operates behind black budget firewalls.
But today, the frontiers of research are not just aerospace or ballistics.
No, they are deeply intimate domains. We are talking about cyberpsychology, advanced biometrics, neural interface technologies.
So we really need to unpack that term cyber psychology as it's used in the text, because it's not just a buzzword for social media addiction.
Far from it.
The sources frame this as the intersection of behavioral science, data architecture, and algorithmic manipulation.
It's the study of how digital interfaces can be engineered to bypass cognitive defenses.
To subtly shift perception, behavior, and consensus reality at a population scale.
Exactly. And when you combine that intimately invasive field of research with the historical reality of government secrecy, the resulting vacuum of trust is profound.
Because there's a track record.
A verifiable track record. The text cites declassified documentation regarding past psychological operations and behavioral modification programs.
The programs that actually existed.
Yes. These were highly classified, heavily funded initiatives aimed at understanding how to manipulate information flows, fracture societal cohesion, and steer public sentiment.
And again, we want to emphasize our impartial stance here. Those programs are matters of historical record now.
Right, they're documented facts.
And the psychological fallout from that realization is what the lone wolf is tracking. If the public knows that institutions have historically invested in the architecture of mass manipulation behind closed doors, it becomes entirely rational for people to question what iteration of that research is currently active in the digital space today.
And when transparency evaporates, human imagination rushes in to fill the void.
It has to. The brain needs a narrative.
This is where the text gets into the mechanics of modern conspiracy culture. When people perceive that the baseline of reality is being actively managed or obscured, they don't just accept the blank space.
No, they construct narratives to map the unknown. They try to connect the dots.
The lone wolf is highly analytical about this phenomenon. He doesn't dismiss these anxieties as mere paranoia. He views them as a logical symptom of a fractured informational ecosystem.
The text outlines very specific fears currently taking hold, manipulating information flows: neuroscience, atmospheric experimentation, environmental modification.
The weaponization of digital narratives.
Right. And explicitly, the factual validity of these specific claims is entirely secondary to the sociological impact of the belief itself.
Whether these fears are fact, misunderstanding, or pure speculation, the critical takeaway is the loss of trust itself.
Because when the architecture of trust collapses, society loses its shared epistemological baseline.
You no longer have a citizenry operating from a common set of facts.
You have highly fragmented, isolated cohorts trying to survive systems they view as potentially malevolent.
And what's fascinating here is how ordinary people are coping with this institutional distrust in their day-to-day lives.
Which perfectly bridges into the third section of the text, the disconnect.
The quiet streets and flickering screens.
Exactly. How does a population actually function day to day when they believe they are navigating a reality that is fundamentally hostile and largely invisible?
It creates a massive juxtaposition between the physical world and the psychological world.
We talked about that split-screen existence earlier, the manicured lawn versus the looming economic collapse. The lone wolf documents some incredibly specific coping mechanisms that arise from this dissonance. Let's look at the way the text frames doom scrolling and digital hypervigilance, not just as bad habits, but as modern pacification tools.
Doom scrolling is such a fascinating behavioral adaptation.
It really is.
When you are confronted with a macro-level threat that you cannot physically fight or flee from, your brain still demands engagement.
It needs to do something.
Right. It demands data gathering as a proxy for survival action. So, you scroll. You consume endless streams of catastrophic data regarding geopolitical conflicts or AI displacement.
You're trying to figure out where the threat is coming from?
You are attempting to build a comprehensive map of the threat landscape, but the text argues that this behavior is ultimately a pacification loop.
A loop that goes nowhere.
Exactly. The act of consuming the data creates a false sense of cognitive agency, but it leaves you entirely physically passive.
You're just sitting on the couch.
You are exhausting your sympathetic nervous system without ever actually affecting the outcome of the threat.
And I want to ask you, the listener, to think about your own habits for a second. Think about the linguistic defenses people use to manage this dissonance. The lone wolf explicitly points out, and this is a great quote, worry disguised as humor, fear hidden beneath sarcasm, curiosity wrapped in conspiracy theories.
Sarcasm is a massive part of this.
It is. For those of you tracking internet culture, think about the pervasive nihilism in modern meme formats. We constantly see gallows humor regarding the collapse of the fiat currency system, or the inevitability of climate disasters, or the absurdity of trying to afford housing in a hyperinflated market.
When was the last time you laughed at a sarcastic joke online that was actually masking a deep skepticism about whether ordinary people have any control over the systems shaping their lives?
We all do it. I do it.
Because sarcasm functions as a psychological shield against systemic powerlessness.
It's a defense mechanism.
If you lack the physical or economic leverage to alter the trajectory of a collapsing system, the only remaining assertion of autonomy is to mock the system.
It is a way of signaling to others that you perceive the absurdity of the situation, even if you cannot escape it.
And the text identifies this as a state of paralyzed observation. The population is acutely aware that the foundational pillars of society are shifting, but because there is no localized vector to attack, the response is entirely passive on the surface.
They watch, they wait, and they whisper.
They sense the rapid change but don't know how to respond.
But the sources from echoes from the edge with the lone wolf are very clear that this passive state, this quiet waiting, is not just about daily anxieties.
No, it's building up to something much larger.
It's a buildup of kinetic potential. And this leads us to the fourth major theme, standing at the precipice of a new era.
Because we are not just experiencing a cyclical period of historical anxiety, the text argues that humanity is experiencing a period unlike anything before.
We are facing a unique, unprecedented convergence of civilization-altering pressures.
The concept of converging crises is really central to the lone wolf's analysis. Historically, societies have faced profound threats. Plagues, world wars, economic depressions.
But usually one at a time.
Or they were isolated by geography. The text outlines a scenario where multiple hyper-complex systems are reaching critical stress points simultaneously.
Unfamiliar and increasingly violent weather patterns.
Expanding wars.
Active nuclear arsenals, hypersonic weapons, and highly fragile, interconnected global financial systems.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the key word there is fragility.
Let's break down the mechanics of that entanglement, specifically regarding the financial and logistical systems mentioned in the sources. We often hear terms like systemic fragility, but what does that actually look like in the context of the text?
Well, the fragility stems from the extreme optimization and interconnectivity of global infrastructure. Modern supply chains and fiat currency networks operate on just-in-time logistics.
Everything arrives exactly when it's needed, with no backup inventory.
Right, and leveraged digital debt. There's virtually no slack in the system. The text points out that billions of people depend on these deeply invisible algorithmic systems functioning tomorrow exactly as they did today.
And if they don't?
If a critical node fails, say, a major collapse in finance or a cyber event takes a clearinghouse offline, it could ripple through supply chains, currencies, and employment globally.
Because the algorithmic nature of the markets ensures that the disruption cascades globally in a matter of hours. The physical delivery of food, energy, and medicine is entirely dependent on the uninterrupted flow of abstract digital data.
And yet, despite these civilization-destroying capabilities existing, the streets are mostly quiet.
Which brings us to the military technology aspect, because layered directly on top of that economic fragility is the acceleration of military tech.
The text specifically calls out active nuclear arsenals, but more importantly, it highlights the deployment of hypersonic weapons.
Let's talk about how hypersonics fundamentally alter the geopolitical risk matrix, because this directly ties back to that feeling of zero agency.
Well, hypersonic glide vehicles and cruise missiles operate at speeds exceeding Mach 5.
A mile a second.
Right. They are often enveloped in plasma sheaths that obscure radar tracking and disrupt communication signals. But the critical sociological point the lone wolf makes is about the compression of the decision loop.
The window of time to react.
Historically, if a geopolitical adversary launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, leadership had a window of time, perhaps 20 to 30 minutes, to observe the threat, orient their defense, decide on a countermeasure, and act.
The OD loop.
Yes. But hypersonic systems compress that decision window to near zero. They effectively remove human deliberation from the kill chain. The warning time is measured in minutes, if not seconds.
So we have an economic system so entangled that a localized digital failure can trigger global physical starvation and a military architecture so fast that it outpaces human cognition.
And yet the public reaction to these massive building pressures is not mass uprising.
Right.
It is quiet conversations.
The paradox the lone wolf observes here is stunning. You have a geopolitical standoff involving hypersonic weapons juxtaposed with a citizen quietly discussing their fears with a neighbor over a fence.
Over a fence, or in online communities, or in late-night discussions, humanity collectively feels like it is standing at the edge of something enormous. But the scale of the threat architecture is so massive and abstract, it induces a kind of collective paralysis.
You cannot march on an algorithm with a pitchfork.
You cannot protest a hypersonic glide vehicle.
The traditional mechanisms of civic uprising are just entirely incompatible with the nature of modern threats. Therefore, the public doesn't erupt. They observe. They trade theories on fragmented digital platforms. They sit in the dark, bathed in the blue light of their screen.
Absorbing the data.
So if we are standing at the edge, what happens when we finally fall or jump? Which brings us to the final and arguably most critical analysis in this deep dive: the silence before the eruption.
If the pressure is building exponentially and the systems are drifting further from human control, what does the breaking point actually look like?
The final source text points out that history rarely announces its turning points in advance.
We tend to view history in retrospect as a series of loud, definitive events.
A battle, a declaration.
Right, but the text argues that the actual transformation builds slowly beneath the surface, through quiet frustration and the sense that systems are drifting further from human control.
It's like tectonic plates. The landscape on the surface, the suburban street, the glowing streetlights looks completely static.
But miles beneath the crust, immense kinetic pressure is building as the plates grind against each other.
The silence on the surface isn't an indicator of peace. It's an indicator of locked tension.
Long periods of silence often precede moments when collective awareness suddenly erupts into action. The current state is quiet observation, but it is a pressurized silence.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the text concludes that the lone wolf is already watching, anticipating the moment the silence breaks.
He's waiting for it.
But what does an eruption into action actually look like in a world governed by invisible algorithms and classified tech?
That's the real question. The lone wolf acknowledges that because the architecture of control is invisible and digital, the inevitable eruption of public awareness and action will likely not mirror the physical revolutions of the past.
We probably won't see the storming of physical barricades.
The eruption might manifest as a sudden, massive psychological decoupling from the digital systems themselves.
These people opting out.
Exactly. Or a radical, decentralized restructuring of local physical economies to bypass fragile global supply chains.
Or the sudden fracturing of national consensus reality to the point where centralized governance simply ceases to function.
While the exact outcome is unknown, the feeling of a shifting world is a universal reality right now.
The exact morphology of the shift is unknown, but the inevitability of it is what the lone wolf is tracking. He's operating from a state of psychological readiness. He isn't waiting to react to the earthquake. He has already acknowledged the fragility of the ground.
He sees the invisible architecture.
He recognizes the historical scars of the classified age. He understands why the public is pacifying itself with digital noise and gallows humor.
He is standing at the precipice, watching the tension build.
And that posture of observation is exactly what the echoes from the edge texts are asking of the reader. It is a demand for critical awareness in an age of profound abstraction.
It's demanding that we pay attention.
As we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, I want to trace the massive arc of this deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We started by dissecting the evolutionary friction of our modern reality, the paralyzing mismatch between a nervous system designed for localized kinetic threats and a world governed by borderless, invisible algorithms.
We then analyzed the deep-seated erosion of institutional trust.
Looking mechanically at how the historical reality of classified black-budget research has created an epistemological vacuum.
We explored how the public, stripped of a shared baseline of truth, rationally attempts to map the unknown through speculation regarding things like cyberpsychology and systemic manipulation.
From there, we examined the extreme psychological toll of the split-screen existence. We broke down how the population uses doom scrolling as a false proxy for survival action.
And how sarcasm and nihilistic humor serve as desperate shields against the feeling of total systemic powerlessness.
We mapped the converging crises pushing civilization to the precipice, The terrifying fragility of hyper-entangled, just-in-time digital economies paired with the deployment of military technologies that have compressed the geopolitical decision loop to near zero.
All this happening while the public remains largely physically passive.
And finally, we explored the nature of that passivity. The realization that the quiet streets are not a sign of stability, but a manifestation of extreme locked tectonic tension. The pressurized silence that precedes a fundamental historical paradigm shift.
Which brings us to a final, provocative thought to leave you with, building on the lone wolf's observations. Something for you to explore on your own.
Yes, think about this in your own daily life.
The sources from Echoes from the Edge with the Lone Wolf emphasize that real historical transformation builds in silence, in the quiet, grinding shifts of foundational systems.
But in our modern lives, we are constantly bombarded by the noise of digital information. The algorithmic outrage cycles, the endless notifications, the curated spectacle of crisis.
It's a constant barrage. So, the provocative question for you to explore is this. Are we mistaking the constant noise of our screens for the actual turning point?
What if the constant digital noise is the exact mechanism designed to distract you from the change?
What if the real transformation in our society is happening in the quiet spaces we are too distracted to notice?
Are we so consumed by the flickering, simulated crises on our screens that we are entirely blind to the actual silent shifting of the tectonic plates beneath our feet?
What realities are taking root in the quiet spaces right now simply because our attention has been entirely captured by the noise?
Are we missing the architecture of the new era because we are too busy doom-scrolling the echoes of the old one?
It's a profound question.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. This has been a profoundly dense and demanding exploration of the echoes from the edge material.
It's been great to unpack this with you all.
We hope this deep dive equips you to look at the quiet streets and the glowing windows in your own life with a much sharper, more analytical lens. Keep your eyes open, keep your minds critical, and above all, stay curious. We'll see you next time.